Hi, and welcome back to Rick's Room. Now, this is the show where we simulate a lounge, maybe in a hotel, at the end of a busy conference day. You've been at a business conference all day long, you've seen a bunch of people, but not the people you were really hoping to visit with. So that's what we do. We bring them on this show. Today, my guest is a published author who's written about an industry that he's been working in for decades. I met him over 30 years ago as a chief technology officer for one of the biggest mortgage loan servicers in the industry, but he had done incredible things before that and passed. He's been a writer for the Mortgage Bankers Association for many, many years, and most recently for Thomson Reuters, where we'll find even more of his material. It's Mark Dangelo. Mark, thanks for being with me today.
Thank you, Rick. A pleasure to be here.
I consider you one of my favorite people to interview because you always tell me things that I hadn't thought about or hadn't thought about deeply enough. And you're doing the same thing now. But before I get into that, I want you to catch me up because it's been a little while now since we've actually got to catch up. What have you been doing lately?
Oh, a whole host of things. As you said, I've been in this industry for a number of years, different industries, healthcare, telecommunications, high tech, and all sorts of forms of financial services. But what I've been really working on is how to gain access to an organization's data, especially in an age of AI. And this started not just before the Gen AI, the ChatGPT came on the scene in 22 and 21, but even before that. How do you use data to do predictability? How can we feed this into, at that point, machine learning models and get different outcomes or get consistent outcomes or ask the proverbial HP generational commercials from 20 years back? It's like, what if? And so if we can access that data, then we unlock secrets that organizations didn't even know they had. And to just give you a perspective, it's okay, data is great. It's like we have systems, we have vendors, we have different platforms, we have databases, we have semi-structured, unstructured. We have all this different type of data. But put it into a macro definition as how big is this bucket? This bucket is the last measures from IDC, which is an independent organization that a lot of times ranks this stuff. From a data perspective, would tell you it's a 10 to the 23 or 24 power every year, not just total. Every year we're creating 10 to the 23, 10 to the 24 data that organizations are either using or storing somewhere in their systems. That's a lot of zeros, a lot of information. That what happens if we could unlock another 10 to 15% of it? So that's what I've been working on, is how do we do that without adding more software, without adding more complexity, without saying lift everything out of there, shift it out, and rip it out and create something new. That doesn't work in today's generation, especially when you have things like artificial intelligence, the new models changing every 6 to 12 months.
Yeah. Now, what I find really interesting about this, Mark, is that you've been working in industries with a ton of data for a long time now. So you've seen the evolution and the new tools that
Mm-hmm.
allow us to do it. Because business intelligence, that whole software thing that came out 20 years ago, the
Right.
promise was it was going to help us make sense of the information we have, to pull insight out of the data. And a lot of companies found that they just weren't actually getting that. Now with AI, that problem could even be bigger because they're going to get more garbage out. How do we fix that problem?
Well, and this is where you've got to go back to the idea of how do I govern that information? How do I access it? And there's simple concepts. And the first point is that nobody understands their data better than the business units that created it.
Hmm.
So from an executive standpoint, it's like, how do I begin a journey? How do I get my return on investment? How do I know where I'm starting from to where I want to get to my future state? Consultants are very good, current state, future state, gaps in between. And they sell that to executives. And we can say that's McKinsey, that's BCG, that's Ernst & Young, that's all the folks that are brilliant. But the reality is, where do I begin? And this is where executives are often struggling, saying, I've got a lot of data. How do I put it together? How do I know where I'm at? What's my risk? How do I compartmentalize that? How do I reuse it? And this is the challenge, because in an AI world, we can crank out stuff in super hyper efficiency, 10 to 15 times greater throughput than we did before, but it's oftentimes dependent upon the data we feed it. If I feed AI non-lineage data, which means I can't trace the lineage back, I can't go to my audit team, my internal, my external, and say that's where it came from. That's the models that we used it. That was the prior state that gave us that decision or the hallucination, whatever the case was. How do I go back and put all that together? And the way to do that is you've got to go back to the governance and say, where was that information created? And this is what we do is saying, helping organizations start understand that the best people to answer that question are the people in your operating lines, your operating trenches, the people, not necessarily IT, but the people that actually create it. And this is a concept we call a data mesh. It actually basically says we are going to manage that information at the core where it is created. And every organization has that center of excellence for their data. They just don't use it. They oftentimes think, oh, I'll feed it to AI, we'll feed it to a transformer or an LLM or an SLM or all the wonderful engineering things that people do, vector databases, lake houses, whatever. They feed it and talk about all that stuff, but the reality is where is that data traceable? Who has it? And that's the idea of a data mesh. And a mesh is about making and leveraging the organizational competence and capability. We don't want to replicate that. We don't want to create data warehouses again. We want to say that's where it is. How do I get to that?
I like that. I like that, Mark. So you've always been the kind of guy that if somebody calls on you, you'll go out, you'll help them, you'll consult, all that. But now you're formalizing things under a new company, and you've introduced a concept that is foreign to me. I want you to understand, explain to me the data foundry. So tell me about the new organization and what that's all about.
Sure. The new organization is called Extent, AXTENT. So it's basically how do I extend or my data in using new technologies that really didn't exist before. And the new technologies in this case aren't replicating information. They're actually mapping to that information. So as I said previously, we got the data meshes and those are kind of compartmentalized on a division or a department or an organizational unit. But then we begin to stitch those together across the way, and we use a data fabric to do that. And the fabric, these are nothing more than rules of how do we get that. We understand how the information is created, where it's deleted, who updates it, what's the modify, what's the integrity. And this could be for structured, unstructured, or what we call synthetic, which is AI generated data. We understand that whole lineage concept. And from an audit and reliability standpoint, that's what we do. The idea of the data foundry says if we can understand all that, and we have all that information, we just never really assembled it. We oftentimes look to vendors to solve that for us, and we kind of like, okay, check the box, that we move on, we do something else. The reality is it's not about how much data you have, but how do you access it? That's the data mesh. The fabric comes horizontally and links all the various meshes. The foundry is an ability basically say, once we understand those components, and organizations have to do this anyway. It's not like we're telling them, we're trying to boil the oceans or doing anything else. This is already going on today, whether you believe it or not, through different software products, different vendor solutions. The Foundry allows you to capture this at a discrete data level for reusability. And let's take a real world example, if you could. And this is how Extent kind of really started to formulate. If we look at things like structured business reporting or the Data Act in the US or Financial Data Transparency Act of recently that's coming online this year and probably through 28, 29. And then the future, which is the structured business reporting. The idea here is that from a regulatory compliance standpoint, using FDTA or SBR, that we define the data once through like a foundry. We don't have all those reg tech solutions to 9 or 10 different agencies, but we define it once and we submit it once. And it's consistent data with common rules. We can trace it back. The foundry allows you to do that, much like you're building an industrialized capability. And so if you do that, then the ability is that you have a repeatability, you have the lineage, you have the governance. And so that's the foundry concept, is that we this is not new, by the way. This is something that back in the days of Big Iron, IBM, digital equipment, Honeywell, all the days, It was a concept that existed, but we could not implement it because the technology was not there. Today, with cloud services, 60% of the world running on SaaS or different components, we have that capability. And now we also have the need for privacy, security, consistency across this. And that's where the foundry really starts to come in. You start to bring all these business drivers together using common components versus the idea here that it was all about tech. You understand the foundry is very key. It was always business rules, process or systems, the technology, and then the data. Today, with AI, that has been flipped because now we're saying AI is a great umbrella. Which AI? Are we talking Gen AI? Are we talking Gen AI with retrieval augmented generation? Are we talking agentic AI? Are we talking agentic AI with retrieval? I mean, what flavor are we? And oftentimes organizations used to think that warehouses, lake houses, all this stuff, they were a one and done, or they were a lift and shift. We copied and replicated, manipulated, and sent it again, and then we just did this 50 or 60 times. In an AI world, that is extremely dangerous because AI, where Gen AI can do inferences, agentic AI, which is the decision gold type of solution that organizations are really striving for, has to have pure data to feed into it. It's not transform the data after the fact and think about it. No, these things are making decisions. So you have different flavors of this, and the foundry allows you in an agentic AI world to maximize your decisions, to improve your revenue, improve your decisions, supply chains, whatever those would be, to really focus on that. And that's a long explanation to what you're asking, but these are not simple solutions anymore. These are complex layers, and you have to understand as you build these layers, much like we did years and years ago, they're back in focus. And it's really about the architecture more than the engineering.
I like that, Mark, because it's like you're going back and taking concepts that we had in the beginning, kind of falling out of favor, and applying that rigor
Yep.
to the problem today. That's awesome. So what kind of companies are you working with? Are you looking to work with now? Who really needs what you're bringing?
Any organization that is in a highly regulated type of industry that deals with different government agencies of multiple types, state, local, federal, this is where we start. And because it's so key, we have to get the data right. And think about this. If I submit invalid information and I was doing it, had all these reg texts or these information going to different agencies, oversights, financial reporting, whatever the case may be. If I got it right, or I got it wrong in one spot, okay, that was isolated, it was contained. In today's interconnected world, in today's AI world, if I put that wrong in one spot and it gets replicated pretty quick. And chances are it's probably replicated not just one or two times, it's probably 20 to 50 times.
Oh my God.
And then you think about the question is, if I'm a consumer or I'm a regulator, how do I undo what was wrong? And this is why the foundry concept, in conjunction with the meshes of fabrics, overall architecture of that data is so key. Another simple concept, and it's overly used. You don't put regular octane gas into a jet engine. It's the same thing. And AI is fancy jet engines that can go Mach 3, Mach 2, Mach 6, whatever the heck they are. But if I'm going to feed it 87 octane gas that has some impurities, guess what? You're probably going to fall out of the sky pretty quick.
That thing can spin out of control in a heartbeat. Now, people are going to want to find out more. One of my favorite places to go to find out more about you and what you're doing is mpdangelo.com. However, I also know that you've been spending a lot of time over the guys at Thomson Reuters, and you've got all kinds of articles on your page. If you just search for Mark Dangelo and Thomson Reuters, you're going to find this. Here's your latest article, Reinventing the Data Core, which is awesome, Mark.
And that's really the whole what's the foundry? It's all about the data core. If the core, just like we used to say, if the core of the apple is rotten, it spoils a whole bunch. It's the same mindset here.
That's right.
Data core is about the reinvention of how we look at systems, and we have to transition from an AI engineering mindset to an AI data standpoint.
Every time I talk to you, Mark, I feel like we don't have enough time. So you're going to have to come back on the show again. Thank you for being with me today.
I appreciate it.
And
thank you very much.
Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.